before I say anything, I want to say I'm very inspired by this morning. So many of you showed up, and that too, with everything being virtual, it really does mean a lot that we're excited to do this on a Friday. So I will go ahead and share. Hopefully, all of you can see that. So welcome to the City Planning and Housing Workshop. Over here, we have these two main links. I think Jack will at some point go ahead and put in these links into the chat as more people start to come in. So the first main link that I want to direct attention to is the questions and action items handout. If clicking it in the chat doesn't work for these links, just feel free to type in bit.ly at /CEMTF handout. And that's going to be primarily, our guiding brochure almost for this little workshop that we're doing. So our goal really is to identify city planning actions that the cities, counties, and this region can take to address the climate crisis, the housing crisis, and of course our transportation needs. So thank you all so much again for being here. We hope that this isn't the last time that we meet and that we have conversations like this. And now I have one action item before we come up with our own at the end. This is the first thing. So there's 3 breakout sessions or groups that we have: the housing planning issues, the housing affordability and homelessness, and then finally transportation and transit. So what would be great is if at this point you could please enter either A, B, or C in the chat to select which session you would like to be grouped into. If renaming yourself is something that is easier for you, you can go ahead and rename yourself to either planning, housing, or transportation, such that we can break you up into the workshop or into the sessions that you want to be a part of. Of course, if at any point you want to switch workshops, please return to the main room. The link is at the top of the handout, and you can always be guided to a different workshop. If you want to switch sessions, then always return to this main meeting room, and you can request a different assignment, and we can go from there. So as all of you go ahead and enter in A, B, or C in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm really excited for this. Jack and I had the chance to speak with these panelists one-on-one, get to know, a little bit about their work. And as a second-year student at Berkeley, I can guarantee you that these people really know so much about these issues that we're going to discuss today. We have Dave Vaughton is the Assistant Director of MTC and ABAG. Crystal Little, the Vallejo Housing Justice Coordinator, organizer with Urban Habitat. She works to raise community awareness on tenant rights and affordable housing, and also some housing strategies. Robert Rayburn is the elected director for BART District 4 and is excited about transforming our cities to reduce car dependency. We have Chris Peoples, the elected at-large director for the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District. He served on the AC Transit Board for 23 years, transit activist long before he joined the AC Transit Board. And finally, we have Jessica Prado. She is a community organizer for Friends on Wheels. And she's a journalist for the San Francisco Public Press covering housing and homelessness. She's also an alum of the UC Berkeley Grad School of Journalism and a former Berkeley commissioner. She served as vice chair of the Homeless Services Panel of Experts. So all of these speakers do have links. I think Jack, we can probably direct them to those in a bit. So those are our panelists that we're going to be hearing from today. And I think I want to, kind of give the spotlight to them as we answer some two broad questions for about 15-30 minutes before we break out into our sessions. So this is the first question to our panelists is, how can we ensure that equity is embedded in the strategies that we produce? So feel free to attack that one.
I'm happy to get the conversation started. Good morning, everybody. Dave Vaughton with the Regional Planning Agency for the San Francisco Bay Area. Obviously, this is a critical moment to really be thinking about equity in the regional policies that we bring to bear, especially when it comes to some of the solutions on the climate. The state of California has made some really important headway on climate issues in the past, but oftentimes equity wasn't embedded in those ideas. So for example of this, is some of the subsidies that were provided for electric vehicles, which ended up really just flowing into the budgets of many of our higher income residents who are able to purchase something like a Tesla. And so I think what you're seeing now is both the state and the region really thinking more about how to design our policies so they can achieve both of these goals. And hopefully I'll have a chance today to talk a little bit about some of the different, what we call means-based strategies in our latest regional plan, Plan Bay Area 2050, where we're trying to weave in, additional consideration and additional subsidies, additional discounts for those who are lower income, time advancing the climate goals.
I'm happy to talk about that if you want. This is Chris.
Yes, by all means.
Thank you. Equity really has to be at the center of a number of things we do. And we always have to be concerned about for whom are we doing whatever we're doing. When it comes to AC Transit, about 65% of our riders are low or very low income. That's 30% to 50% of area median income. About 70% of them are persons of color. And we're always very aware of that as we move forward. During the pandemic, which is a temporary thing, but it's going to last for 3 or 4 years, everybody keeps talking about how people are going to distance work from home and distance learn and all that stuff. Well, a very large percent of our riders are what nowadays they call essential workers, used to be called blue collar workers. They can't work from home. You can't be a teacher, a janitor at a hospital, grocery store clerk from home. And so all of that needs to be taken into consideration as you develop all these systems. We are in the process, the people who are most affected by poor air are poor people of color. And we're in the process, and we've developed a plan as required by the California Air Resources Board to be 100% zero emission by 2040. BART's already there, they're all electric. But that's gonna involve a whole lot of money, and how do you find that funding? So it all, you need to be concerned about equity, and that has to be reflected in the funding. Anyway, thanks.
I'd like to address that from the perspective of transit-oriented development. It's one word: affordability. And affordability applies to either residential or commercial properties, and we're implementing that in our policies at BART.
And Crystal and Jeska, if you can also hop in, because both of you work in pretty different communities, I would say. And so how do you think equity in these strategies could look different. And is that important for us to recognize that equity doesn't look the same if we're, serving a homeless community or a small city like Vallejo? So if you can maybe lend some insight into that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hello, guys. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of homelessness, I would say that, we haven't really integrated equity because, really not a lot of people are being helped. Like, we're only helping like a small percentage of people at this moment. So I just think like if we were to plan, we really had to be more inclusive of everyone's situation, because right now all we really are helping is people that are chronically homeless. But right now there's a lot of people that need help, especially homeless families. And of course they haven't been on the street just as long, but they need just the help just the same. So I would say that, another way of just putting equity into this, I would say that we gotta just reimagine housing. There's not enough housing vouchers for everybody to be inside. And, a vehicle is an option just to be able to be, a little bit better. And it's a step forward into like, getting permanent housing. And, and that way people are able to take care of themselves in the meantime, instead of like having to be on the streets, having to be on the hunt all the time. Having a vehicle really helps a long way. So just thinking about reimagining, ways of alternative housing that will be inclusive for everyone.
Yeah, and along the line of inclusivity, I think equity needs to be deeply embedded into what we do and how we do it in terms of community organizing. So specifically when it comes to housing, like how are we making sure that our folks currently existing in our communities aren't being displaced and pushed out further and having to deal with other issues that come with longer commutes, living further away from community and the systems that you're deeply rooted in. And so for me in Vallejo, it's really making sure that like our community residents are deeply engaged in the work we do. And so we actually have a steering committee that actually like directs a lot of the work I do, and just making sure that we're really addressing the needs of like our very diverse population and understanding that like we do need to reimagine some of these systems, but altogether we also just need to think about like how do we make sure we're serving everyone's needs and not just through like a socioeconomic perspective, but also through class, gender, race, ethnicity, background. So just making sure that those are at the forefront of all of the work we do and that those voices aren't further being ignored and silenced in the process in the work we do.
Yeah, thank you. We also have Anita Blount from Dignity on Wheels here. It's a mobile service that provides case management and medical assistance to the underserved communities. So Anita, if you're here, please feel free to introduce yourself and maybe try and lend some insight into equity in the strategies.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. My name is Anita Blount, and I am the program coordinator for Dignity on Wheels, which is a mobile hygiene shower program. We provide showers, laundry service. Our units have washers and dryers, toilets, and various levels of case management to our unhoused community members. In terms of equity, we are a little bit of a different animal from some of the other panelists and organizations that are here today in that we are a mobile service that goes out to the fringes. The way that we normally secure the places where we will go and provide service is through partnerships with organizations, community centers, different entities like that. And what tends to happen is those individuals, interestingly enough, who are maybe a little bit on the higher end of our economic scale, but are still in the same position. Those communities don't normally partner with organizations like us. So yeah, we go out to encampments, we'll partner with churches, like I said, community centers and different things like that. But communities that have that kind of higher economic individual or community don't normally partner with us. So in terms of equity, we are more than willing to go anywhere to provide those services. But sometimes, like I said, those other different communities don't normally want us in their area. So the individuals that are working and maybe even have a pretty decent paying job have to kind of come out of their own community to a different community to get our services. So that's, for us, we're open to anyone and everyone, and we'll welcome anyone. But we're not always welcomed in the community, in certain communities, I would say.
Definitely. So to kind of, really frame our conversations for the rest of this morning, I think that this is a question that can really help guide us. And that's, how might we reimagine our urban districts as inclusive, which Anita talked about, and Jessica and Crystal talked about so wonderfully, as technologically advanced. So can we implement these ideas of digitization and smart cities, and also as equitable and sustainable? And on top of that, can we achieve all of those things at the same time? So can we tackle inclusivity and technological advancement together, or are those two goals something that might need to be pursued one at a time? So if our panelists can maybe lend some insight into that and help guide our thinking.
If I could just interject, I think, I know Dave Vaughton submitted some slides, so I wanted to make sure he had a chance to present that. And I think this question is one that sort of sets the overriding view of what we're looking for. But, if each of the panelists had some particular things that they wanted to present, I think this would also be a good time to do that. So, I don't want to have you not answer that question, but I also want to give you time to make the presentation of the points you had brought. And then once we get into the breakouts, of course, we'll get into more detailed discussion. So if that's okay with you, Yusra, why don't we let the panelists go ahead and make whatever presentation they might have brought. Maybe Dave, if you want to start, you could go ahead and show us what you prepared.
Absolutely. I can go ahead and stop sharing. I think that's just a great point.
Right. If you stop sharing, then
to do that. Yeah. All right. Dave, you can take it away.
Recognizing there are a lot of panelists, I will keep my remarks relatively brief here. I think it is a good lead-in question to give you a quick 5-minute kind of picture of some of the big things we're thinking about on the regional level. I think the biggest thing I would add to the question that was just posed it did refer to making urban districts more equitable and inclusive. I think what we would like to see, speaking on behalf of the regional agencies, is all of our communities in the Bay Area being more inclusive and equitable and sustainable. So much of the development in the region in recent years has been focused into so few places because there are so many places that really haven't stepped up to the plate to make progress in this regard. And so it's going to take all the cities in the Bay Area to do that. I just want to briefly speak and give a quick overview for some of the breakout groups as you think about some of the strategies that might help us get there. So I come from the perspective of the public sector. We've been working closely with communities for over 2 years now on a plan we call Plan Bay Area 2050, which is a 30-year vision for transportation and housing, the economy, and the environment. And we're working to try to find the most resilient and equitable strategies to advance the regional vision that was approved last year, which is a Bay Area that's more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. So I'm just going to briefly speak to a few of the strategies we think are necessary to get there. And then I really look forward to hearing what the different breakout groups discuss in order to make some headway there. On the topic of affordability, a few things that are really important as we think about the region's future are enabling the opportunity for more housing, and particularly more affordable housing near our region's public transit system as a way for more people to live in walkable, transit-oriented places, and for more affordable housing, again, just in communities that have often taken the disproportionate share of that, but in a more equitable distribution across the counties. And that the, that regional and local agencies are providing discounts for lower income individuals because not everyone has the same means to access our transportation system. Some of the key strategies in terms of thinking about the region's climate for transportation include creating a world-class public transit system, standardizing our transit fares, having a unified payment system where transfers don't pose a burden to folks who have those long multi-system commutes. And by pricing our transportation system, but doing so in an equitable manner where there are significant discounts for low-income individuals. And this might mean all-lane tolling on some highways in order to reduce the emissions that those highways are producing today. Some other strategies that we are considering on the regional level focus on preserving our region's diversity and growing it over time. Renter protections, inclusionary zoning, and expansion of our growth areas into these high resource places that have for far too long sought to keep new residents from joining those communities. And also providing economic programs to ensure equitable outcomes like child care support. When it comes to the climate, we also need to be thinking about making sure folks are feeling safe to bike and walk, reducing speed limits so emissions are lower, but also streets are safer, and protecting our communities from sea level rise and retrofitting homes so they're zero energy, while at the same time making them safer in earthquakes, and protecting our green belt, which is an important part of our environmental strategy. And then lastly, we need to be thinking about jobs and where those jobs are located, what sort of fees that could be applied to discourage developments like the Apple spaceship shown here, as well as to preserve our critical industrial lands, which often provide a pathway to the middle class. So that's just a quick overview of some of the things we're thinking about on the regional level, and I look forward to discussing more with you today. There's also more information on our website if you'd like to join the conversation on that front. So thanks for giving me a few minutes to share.
Great. Yusra, are you pointing to others, or may I jump in? Or
yes, please. And Dave, thank you so much for that. It would be great if you could give the participants access to that, so that, if we want to access it after the meeting. That was really insightful. And yeah, Robert, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you, and thank you, Dave, for your excellent introduction, and Yusra for your facilitation. I want to call attention to my virtual background. It's Fruitvale BART. Fruitvale BART station has overtaken 12th Street, 19th Street, and downtown Berkeley as the busiest station in the East Bay. That's reflecting the essential workers who are flowing through those fare gates every day. The transit-oriented development, and we can think of Fruitvale as part of that, is inseparable. The transportation and land use are joined at the hip. We've seen since Fruitvale opened in 2004, funding changes for transit-oriented development, and I'll just say TOD, and policies have changed. When Fruitvale first opened, it was a meager 88 units on 2 city blocks. Given the Bay Area's housing production, that it hasn't kept pace with job growth, that's inadequate. So the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, has now identified a need for over 1,000 units. Of course, many advocates have called for, we probably need 1 million units. By 2014, the state had acknowledged this housing need and initiated a cap and trade funding for affordable housing and sustainable communities. Bart's MacArthur Village, then under construction, influenced Governor Brown and Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg in this watershed agreement to invest in climate protection, social equity, and California's communities. And I'll remind everyone that building affordable housing costs the same amount as it costs to build a market rate unit. In 2016, the BART board adopted a bold TOD policy calling for 20,000 units system-wide, with 35% or 7,000 units being affordable. I want to jump to the 5th round of the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant Program this year. BART staff prepared or assisted on 8 grant applications. On June 25th, the Strategic Growth Council awarded $193 million for all 8 projects. That's phenomenal. A total of 913 affordable units will be built on BART property at Balboa, Fruitvale, and West Oakland, and near BART at Ashby, Bayfair, Concord, North Berkeley, and Powell. West Oakland's Mandela Village represents the largest affordable development in the state with 240 units. My goal of reshaping our cities around transit is indeed taking place. There's more. The low carbon sustainable communities component of the AHSC grant awarded nearly $39 million for BART active transportation projects like a bike station at West Oakland and the Ohlone Greenway improvements at North Berkeley. And for the first time, AHSC contributed funding for 24 new BART cars to carry TOD residents and workers. That is truly a watershed moment for us. What's next? There's work in the planning stages at El Cerrito Plaza. Over 500 units are entitled for Lake Merritt. But I'll just leave it that Assembly Bill 2923 is the topic of the hour. It was approved, signed into law in 2018, and it will expand zoning density to a minimum of 75 units per acre on all BART lands. Visit bart.gov/AB2923 to learn more or see the maps. And these are fantastic maps showing eligible BART properties. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was really insightful, and I do want to take a second to acknowledge the conversations in our chat. It's really amazing. This is exactly what we're hoping this workshop is. It's not a presentation; it's a conversation. So this question was posed, I think, to you, Robert. Define affordable units. So maybe in the breakout session, you can. Certainly. Pay heed to that. I do want to give a few more minutes to Jessica, Crystal, Anita, if you have any insights relevant to the question of how we can achieve, an urban district that is sustainable and technologically advanced and inclusive, and maybe specific examples to what you have experienced, servicing your own communities. So we can spend a few more minutes on that. Any one of you can jump in.
If I could just do a technical check-in first. I've assigned most of the breakout rooms, but Crystal, you have a great system there. You put a little letter right after your name. If other people could follow your example, that seems to be the easiest thing. Rather than doing the chat, just make sure that you rename yourself with A, or you can say planning, B, or you can say housing, or C, you can say transportation. And that way, I'll make sure you're in the right breakout room, and I won't have to read the chat to do that. So thank you, Crystal, for that idea. We didn't think of it before, but that's a good one.
You might want to
I think you muted yourself. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You might want to tell everyone how to change their name. You have to click on your face, and then you get those 3 little buttons, and it says rename. That's
Right.
how you do it.
Yes, thank you
Thank
for that.
Sure.
So I'm going to rename myself just to set
Keep
that up.
yourself muted.
Yeah, so I just put in the chat, A for planning, B housing, and C transportation. But yeah, I think Jessica, you unmuted yourself, so I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah. So just tackling your question that you had mentioned about like how can we be inclusive, technologically advanced, and still be equitable and sustainable. In my experience, I would say that that is possible, that we can actually do that. And a form that we have been able to do that on the streets, it's a vehicle, it's affordable to everyone. I mean, people that are on the streets are not going to be able to, be able to save up for an apartment. That the goal that people have is to save up for a van or to save up for an R&B, right? So that's something that can actually be attainable, something that they can actually give them stability. And it's just like about reimagining places where people can park. Like, I mean, we have assigned places where bikes can park, other things we can, so how come we haven't assigned places where people can live, and it's very simple. Like, I would say, like, it doesn't take up as much space, and there could be like sections that are not so busy that could be assigned for people to be closer to school, to their jobs, to be able to keep living and in a sustainable manner, because that way you're not traveling as much, you're not spending as much or driving around. You're just kind of like situated in a place where that you work and then you go to school. And so I just think that's just a way that we could do it. And then I do have a few photographs that I could share real
Yes.
quick. And share my screen real quick.
Hello.
Can you see my
May I
screen?
speak at this point? Okay, I had a couple of things I wanted to add on the homeless issue. One is that the process right now under COVID-19 through BACS, the Bay Area Community Services Group, is a little complicated, and it makes it much more difficult for clients who are out without housing to get into those units that were designated for those who are at risk of being exposed to COVID. We've had 6 clients in the last 4 weeks, only one of whom has gotten a unit, and that was through the Berkeley City of Respite program. And that was because we literally hand walked him through. But the other 4 clients, 2 of whom had children, and the other 2 of whom were older women, are still sort of floating around between temporary places, and they haven't received a key under safer ground. They've put in all the paperwork that they were supposed to get, but unfortunately, they have not seemed to be able to break through the paper process to get to an actual room with a key. And I think that possibly we should be able to do a little bit better than that. Thank you.
Yeah, and to jump in if I can, so Vallejo is not an urban area. We're part of what you consider as maybe like a suburb. So I think when it comes to like thinking about, like how do we make sure that like our community is seeing all of these changes at the same time, I don't necessarily think that it can, just because we are just like in a different position geographically, I think financially, and also too, like we don't have the systems that you see in other parts of the Bay Area to really bring in this type of work. And so I think in part of reimagining, I think we need to redefine like what kind of like, basic underlying values we're holding. Are we reimagining our communities with the understanding that housing is a human right? Because I think we should. Without this like understanding, like this baseline knowledge and just like value, like we can't really rethink or reimagine what our communities should look like or can look like if we just don't have that value. And so it needs to be deeply grounded in just like also too what our community needs. It's I heard on the chat, like, I'm getting hints of gentrification, right? And that's kind of like, okay, like, how do we improve our communities, but also make sure that people aren't being displaced? So like, what policies are we pursuing that are going to make sure that, like, again, we're not displacing our folks, that they have options to move laterally, like, they get better housing options, they have safer housing options, and they're not being just like forced into living a reality where they're just like fending for themselves and on survival mode all of the time. So I think while it would be great to think that like all of these can happen simultaneously, we also need to think about like what are the underlying values and how do we make sure that like communities like Vallejo that are so far off the Bay Area but not close enough are also being considered, because this is where like a lot of people are being pushed to. And so like how do we make sure that our services are only just catering to like middle class or higher upper class families, but that we're really considering are very, very low, extreme income, low income families and people who are houseless and unsheltered. So just want to toss it out there that, like that's the ideal, but we're just not there. And
Yeah.
it'll be a very long time before we get there because we're just so far behind.
Yes, I definitely agree. And I think that, if we have a visual to kind of put this in perspective, because an issue like this, I think we want to visualize it in different ways. So Jessica, if you can maybe share your photos, you can feel free to share your screen if that works for you. Yeah, perfect. Congratulations, by the way, on your story.
Sorry, can you guys see my screen?
Oh, it just started. Yes, yeah,
Okay,
just
that's good.
for a
All
sec.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just basically a photo essay about our community here in Berkeley. And just like I was saying, is that a vehicle could be, a pathway to having some kind of temporary shelter, or even, a lot of people are just like, this is the only place that they can actually afford. A lot of people are on fixed income. By the time that they're on the streets, a lot of people are in SSI, just like paychecks that they're only, able to get once a month. So I think like we have to have housing that people can afford, and that that they're not in fear that they're gonna be evicted or be taken away. So this is just like some of the people that live here in West Berkeley, in their RVs, in their cars, and vans.
So over what period of time were these photos collected? Was this like within the past few months, or before or after COVID hit?
Yeah. So this was actually before COVID. I would say that after COVID hit, actually, like, we have more space on the streets to be around. Like, we're able to get out of our vehicles and walk around. Like before, there was so much foot traffic all the time that people just don't feel comfortable to come out. And now I feel like we can actually get a fresh some air, and be able to be more comfortable in our own street. So in a way, yes, it has been bad because now all public places are closed. So it has been difficult to get water, to charge, to find Wi-Fi, just to stay connected. But in another way, having less crowded streets has really been able to help out people to fix their vehicles, fix their homes, and just be able to talk to the neighbors, peacefully. But yeah, so a lot of the repairs before COVID-19 would actually take place at night, and people will have to stay up at night to fix their vehicles.
Wow.
Not right now, the police are actually being a little bit more lenient, so people have been able to fix them up in broad daylight. But the thing is that parking enforcement has also resumed already, and even though we're in a shelter-in-place order, like, people's homes actually can be towed. And we actually just had an RV be towed last week after July 4. So the thing is that, there has to be a moratorium to also protect people's shelters. Like, no matter what kind of shelter they live in, this is their shelter. This is what they can, this is what they call home. And I just think that, that's something that has to be addressed. The fact that there's no moratorium for people that are in the house. People are still being pushed around and moved around the city.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think this is thank you so much for sharing this, because I think that's important as we go into these breakout sessions in just a minute or so is this idea that behind the statistics that we've seen this morning, there are these faces that you did an amazing job of capturing. So thank you for sharing that. And Jack, if we're ready to break out, or
I think so. I think there are some people that have had their hands up, but I would really like to just have the conversation move to the breakouts so that everybody can get more opportunity to participate. And you can certainly, we hope people can introduce themselves, how they happen to be here, I really appreciate you, Dave, for sticking around with this. We're here to try to, a lot of the ideas in our survey that we're going to pass out at the end of this are ideas that came from Plan Bay Area. So what we want to do is see, well, are we supporting this? Are we in disagreement? How strongly do we support it? So this is our regional plan. Dave's been really instrumental in putting it together. It has to do with all of the things he talked about: housing, transportation, economy, all the things that we're talking about today. So I appreciate that he's here to listen, and all of us are here to try to brainstorm and figure out how to solve making a healthy city. I mean, that's the goal of today's workshop. We're just doing a little part of it. It's a big part, though. Housing is a huge part. Transportation is a huge part. So we've got a lot to try to do here. So let's break into the breakout groups. And if I'm going to stay here in the main room for a few minutes, just in case somebody is in the wrong room. But thanks for putting your letters by your name, and hopefully that will work. Now let's see here. I got to.
Jack, could you put me in C? I couldn't get my screen is so small, I couldn't get all of the pieces on the screen at the same time. So I wanted to be in C, even though I spoke on the other one. Omowale.
Okay, wait a minute. And your name is?
Omowale.
Okay, let me see when I find you on the list here.
I think I'm near the top somewhere. Actually, my photo is right next to you.
I see you, but I don't see you on the breakout rooms yet. I'm not sure why. Just
That's
stay here. Oh, wait, I see you now. You were in A, so I'm going to move you to which one do you want to be in?
Transportation.
Okay. And I will say that it looks like the rooms are pretty evenly distributed, which is great. I was worried that we'd all be in one or the other. So this is going to work out well. I think we can all just stay in these breakout rooms. It's 10:30 now. Let's stay for at least a half hour, maybe 45 minutes, then come back together as this workshop to share notes. And then we'll go back to the big plenary session at 11:30. So we have a little time here. I hope everybody gets a chance to talk. I'm going to open up the rooms, and like I said, I'll stay here for a minute in case anybody wants to switch around. Okay.
And Jack, you moved me.
I put, wait a minute, where did I put you? Cheryl, you want to be in B, right?
What's B? Housing?
That's the housing one, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where you're going to go. Okay, here we go.
Thank you.
So let's see, I see people from A and B and C. So I guess everybody's heading back at this point. And we have 35 participants. So that's pretty cool. I think we started out with 45 and 35 of us hung in there. So thank you for participating in all this. And I don't know, Yusra, are you on the line here now? Did we lose Yusra? She's my key ally. There we go.
She's here, yeah.
Yes, I was muted.
Well, thanks to Yusra. We really tried to put this together. I just came from the transportation panel, and I sent out that survey, and somebody right away pointed out that we messed up because it went from strongly disagree on one side to strongly disagree on the other side. But let's say number 1 is strongly disagree and number 5 is strongly agree. So sorry for the confusion, but we would appreciate it if people can take a shot at filling that out. That'll help us at least give some sense of whether people are on board with supporting the MTC's Plan Bay Area goals, which I think are worth supporting, and we'd like to hear what you have to think, what you think about them. So how did everybody go? Do people want to give report backs? I was just kind of bopping around, and I had to go back to the main room a lot because there were people coming and going there too. So I only heard little glimpses of the conversation. So maybe each group could talk a little bit about how it went. Can group A want to do that?
Jack, could you resend the survey from the transportation group, please? Because I did not get the change in the grading.
Well, I didn't have time. I started to make the change, but I didn't.
Agree.
I didn't have time to make the change. So you just have to remember that number 5 is strongly agree.
Okay.
Because
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just learned this like 5 minutes ago, and I'm not that fast at the editing.
Okay.
Thanks, though.
Yeah, and just quickly for anyone who hasn't filled out the survey, I just posted it right there.
Where is it?
It's I can do it one more time, but it's the
Thank you.
CEMTF-survey. But yeah, sorry, if Breakout Session A wants to give a report back how that went.
I think we had a great discussion. I want to turn it over to David, who was our note taker, to share some of the key findings.
Oh, let me see if I can find them. I've got somebody open.
Well, while you're pulling it up, David, I can just kind of share briefly what we were talking a bit about regional planning and the housing context. We had a pretty useful conversation about some of the innovative and creative solutions that may be needed to enable more inclusionary communities and more sustainable communities. Really looking at all different types of places for growth. Redeveloping aging malls, building more ADUs, really looking hard at the inclusionary levels to ensure there's an appropriate amount of affordable housing, especially near transit. So I think we had a great discussion about that. We also had a chance to talk a bit about how to really create vibrant innovation districts, especially in places like Silicon Valley, but increasingly in communities like San Leandro. That's kind of a new innovation district emerging around the BART station there. And that really trying to create more mixed use places, especially in the South Bay, where more people can walk and take transit to and from their destinations. And there's not just this separation of uses. David, did you want to add anything to the summary?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about transit-oriented development and focusing around existing developed areas and not building out into relatively low density areas. There was a strong push to look at AB 2923 and how do we deal with the pushback on density that we're facing. So we need to incentivize below market housing. There needs to be a wealth redistribution process that ensures that people can actually afford housing, which is not happening right now. Talk about adaptive reuse of old structures like malls and parking lots for housing. And the issue of integrating income levels within various areas, not have exclusive high density, high income and then left over for low income areas so much, but really start integrating our communities into something more resembling an average. Do we look at innovation districts? How could we apply this to Silicon Valley, where there are large areas that have virtually no transit whatsoever and long commutes? And then there was a question of what do we do with remote working, which applies to a lot of people, but it applies only to people who work in offices. It does not apply to people who work in factories or service centers. How do we deal with that?
Thanks, David. I think that wraps it up for group one. Happy to turn it back to Jack.
Okay, well, Yusra, why don't you take it over for group B?
Sure. Yeah, so for Group B, we focused on housing affordability and homelessness, and our questions really lent some insight into, these issues that are going on in communities that are often, excluded from the conversations. Crystal talked a lot about how, because of the fact that, Vallejo is a smaller city, not receiving that funding or that support it poses a problem to the communities there. We also talked a lot about resource reallocation for the homeless community, and in what way we can continue to support the homeless community, especially during this pandemic. I think Carol might have brought up that because there's so many students that are now vacating areas in Berkeley, that might actually pose a chance to house more people. So I think that reminding ourselves that there are many different ways that we should be thinking about allocating these resources. Another interesting point that was brought up was this housing first approach, which a lot of people are now taking up. We talked about how in Finland they implemented that, and rather than focusing on providing services, maybe we can change our focus to actually providing housing. So those were some of the things that we discussed. I think coming up with tangible solutions is often difficult to a problem that has sustained itself for decades now, but it's really interesting. The perspectives in this workshop were very diverse. So if anybody else from this workshop does want to hop in and maybe say something that I might have missed, please feel free to. Yeah, but other than that, Jack.
I know Cheryl was on that workshop, and Cheryl, maybe you could give us your perspective on how the conversation went. Are you still there? Did you get muted?
Takes me a minute sometimes. Haven't had adequate coffee this morning. Well, we also talked about COPA and TOPA and how I feel like we need to get more incentives for landlords to open up their empty units now. We know that all these high-rise or larger market rate units might not be, or some of them are empty now, and we need to get those filled with, they could be utilized if the rents were more affordable. I don't know how to make that happen, but there's a lot of empty units because Berkeley actually isn't going to have, and a lot of communities aren't going to have the students coming back to their community. So we need to either open up the dorms to provide housing for people, or get these units to be more affordable. And housing first, yes, definitely. We have, a rapid rehousing in Berkeley. So we just need to make sure that all those kinds of services get funded and people are able to utilize that and move forward in that way. But we really have to get more affordable units that are truly affordable for everyone.
I don't believe that we have any control over what the university does with the dorms, but the city needs to do something about these large buildings, as you said, that have so many vacancies, and they need to be requiring them to take extremely low income people also. But that involves some sort of subsidies. I'm not sure how we would fund those subsidies. And I'm relying on somebody else who has more knowledge to come up with the idea. As far as the small landlords, this whole thing about incentives, I understand it in some sense, but in another sense, we have to face, this is discrimination. We shouldn't have to provide incentives to people. I mean, it would be so insulting if you said to somebody, well, we have to give incentives to someone so that they take somebody Black or they take somebody gay. And it's the same thing with people who are poor. I mean, there's an ordinance in the book books, I mean, if people have subsidies or vouchers, they're not, the landlord shouldn't have to get an incentive to accept them. It's discrimination.
Okay,
And
Carol, I want to give time for that. We got to go in a couple minutes. So I want to give time to the third group, the transportation group, to weigh in. So Allison, can you give us a quick report? Sorry to cut you off, but we're running out of time.
Sure, yeah, I'll try to quickly do justice to the great conversation we had in the transit breakout. So first, people brought up some really great considerations about equity, about especially people who are transit dependent and might not have a vehicle, making sure people have access means to pay fare, and just related also to how transit is so tied to the housing affordability conversation, right? And where things are, where people live, where the businesses people are trying to get to are. So just that it's hard to talk about transit without talking about that. Of course, the impacts of the continuing COVID pandemic on funding was a recurring theme. It was just a great mix in our group, I think, of people who were working. We had like Debbie and Tom who were working on local, Alameda and Berkeley walk, bike, and sustainability initiatives. So trying to connect those, I think, with all the different levels of jurisdiction with transit was really interesting, a sort of continuing theme, how we think about cities and really local things and, bike paths and things alongside, the MTC plan and broader things. Finally, I think there were some really interesting calls too for the need to involve youth and voters in a lot of this work in these conversations, because they are key to sharing this message. But finally, I really liked, Kathy had this great sort of call for a transformation in thinking about how a lot of the fundamental flaws and problems with efforts to even improve our transit planning toward these goals are still very, very vehicle centric. But this need to really step back from that and think about things walkability centered and really transit first is like a change of thinking that could be reflected in a lot of improved solutions. So just really inspired again by the wealth of knowledge in this group and excited to continue these conversations. Anything I missed that anyone wants to share? Thank you again, transit team.
Okay, well, I just want to thank all the teams. I like I say, I was moving around and all the conversations looked really lively and really thoughtful. So I really appreciate everybody being here. And we're going to go back to the big group now and see what happened. I'm really curious to see what happened in all the other workshops. So I put the link in the chat. It's tinyurl.com/CEMTF main room. So let's go back there and join in the conversation and what's happening back there.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.